Let's find out about a type of weapon you've probably never heard of before, but you actually know what it is. Hi there folks, Matt Easton, Scholar Gladiator. So this should be a relatively brief one by Matt Easton standards. I am always researching primary source material, so I'm looking at original accounts, particularly of combat around weapons and armour and things like this. So I found myself, as you do, researching in the Middlesex session rolls again for the year 1593, and I was looking at combat accounts, in fact more specifically people who've been killed, so essentially reports about killings. Some of them are murders, some of them are duels, and misadventure and all sorts, okay? And I was reading about an account, which I'm going to read you in a second, where a weapon that I had never heard of before was mentioned. Now, I haven't discovered this term. I've subsequently found that actually this term is documented because it turns up in a number of rather famous, as you'll see as this video goes on, rather famous authors have used this word in the Elizabethan era. That's right, I'm talking about Shakespeare and others, incidentally. And so I just wasn't familiar with this word at all, and so much so that I went and started Googling and I started looking in other period accounts, and it's opened up a whole new rabbit hole of research for me, because I've found that because this term is used in other historical accounts, it's turning up historical accounts that I had not found before because I didn't know this term. And that's why period terminology is so important to know, because if you know the Elizabethan term for a specific object, which might not be the same term that we use now, if you know how they spelled it and you know that word, it enables you to find other documents talking about that specific thing. So what is this mystery word? It is the curtal axe. What on earth is a curtal axe? Now, I vaguely knew that a kirtle was a type of medieval clothing. But what's a curtal axe? An axe for cutting kirtles? An axe that you wear with a kirtle? My brain was like, I can think of all sorts of possibilities of what this could be. Let's look at the period source which introduced me to the curtal axe. So this is from the Middlesex Session Rolls of 1593 for the 7th of July in the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. The coroner's inquisition post-mortem taken at St Margaret's Parish in Westminster on view of the body of George Barton, gentleman, there lying dead and killed, with verdict that between the hours of 1 and 2 p.m. Of the said day, Edmund Wilton, late of London gentleman, was in God's and the Queen's peace at the said parish in the parlour of the dwelling house of Nicholas Nelson, when the said George Barton, with a drawn dagger and 2 shillings and worth 2 shillings and 8 pence, and with a sword called a curtal axe. So it's a sword. Okay, we'll come back to it in a minute. Curtal axe worth 5 shillings. That gives us some relative values there. Notice the dagger is worth 2 shillings and a bit, and the curtal axe, which is apparently a type of sword, is worth 5 shillings. So, you know, more than twice as much as the dagger. So maybe twice the size. Then and there, drawn, made an assault on the aforesaid Edmund, and furiously hurled at him the aforementioned dagger. Now that's super interesting for combat accounts, because he threw the dagger. We actually don't have many combat accounts, certainly in this period, of someone throwing a dagger rather than just using it in their left hand for parrying or using it in their right hand for stabbing. It was very popular at this time in the Elizabethan period to use a dagger in the left hand while using a rapier or a sword in the right hand as a parrying device, and sometimes for stabbing as well. But anyway, sword and dagger was very, very popular. So he hurled the aforementioned dagger, whereupon the said Edmund withdrew himself from the said George Barton into a corner of the parlour. He backed off, and the said George Barton, in continuing his assault, furiously followed the said Edmund Wilton with his drawn sword, with the intention of slaying and murdering him, by reason of which, and because the aforementioned George Barton was between him and the door of the same parlour, so he had no route of escape, so that the said Edmund could not escape with his life, he, having a certain rapier worth 5 shillings, and this is fascinating for weapon aficionados here, because we've got a sword called a curtal axe, and a rapier, and a dagger which has been thrown. Anyway, the rapier worth 5 shillings, which, note, is the same value as the curtal axe. So whatever the curtal axe is, It's the same value as a rapier worth 5 shillings, which he then and there held in his right hand drawn, in lawfully defending himself. And you'll notice this is very similar to modern legal cases. If you kill someone in self-defense, if it's truly self-defense, you couldn't escape, you're backed into corner, in fear of my life, you kill someone, then it's lawful. In lawfully defending himself, then and there with the said sword, the rapier actually, gave the said George a mortal blow, of which he then and there died instantly. And that in thus killing George Barton, the said Edmund Wilton slew him lawfully in self-defence and for the preservation of his own life. So he wasn't therefore to be punished. So some argument happened. He pulled out his curtal axe and a dagger. He threw the dagger rather than using it in his left hand, which it presumably didn't hit. Edmund backed into a corner, had no choice, pulled out his rapier, presumably thrusted it into his attacker and killed him in self-defence. But what is a curtal axe? Well, I'm sure you have some theories based on the context of this account and the word itself, curtal axe. What does that sound a little bit alike? But I thought, you know, I can't make any assumptions here. I've got to go and search for this word. And one of the first things I came up with was writings by a certain William Shakespeare. That's right, the William Shakespeare. He wrote something called Locrine, and which is a play, I believe, and it's believed that he first penned it in around 1591, and it was registered, I think, in 1594 and was on the stage by 1595. But anyway, it dates to the 1590s. Now note, this account that we read from the Middlesex Session Rolls dates to 1593, so they're exactly the same time. So what we can conclude from that, bearing in mind they're both in London, both in the 1590s, is that a curtal axe, whatever it is, was a very common word or spelling expression in the 1590s in London at this time. So in Locrine it refers to, and this is a piece of the text, it says, "Ne'er shall mine eyes behold that dismal hour, ne'er will I view that rueful spectacle, for with my sword, this sharp curtal axe, I'll cut in sunder my accursed heart." Very Shakespearean. But again it says, "For with my sword, this sharp curtal axe." So therefore, whatever a curtal axe is, it's not an axe, because we've now got two sources from the 1590s describing it as a sword. And Shakespeare goes on, because in circa 1599 he wrote As You Like It, a very famous play, and Rosalind in it says, "Were it not better, because that I am more than common tall, that I did suit me all points like a man, a gallant curtal axe upon my thigh, a boar spear in my hand, and in my heart lie there what hidden woman's fear there will. We'll have a swashing and a marshal outside, as many other mannish cowards have." Blah, blah, blah. And it goes on. So she refers to a curtal axe. She's talking about, if she was a man, a gallant curtal axe upon her thigh, which is a common expression to say for wearing it on your hip, basically, and a boar spear in my hand. Very, very manly. But this is a curtal axe upon my thigh. Now, technically, you could say, well, you could wear an axe on your thigh, but in balance of probability and in the fact that we've got another piece of Shakespearean text where it specifically says a sword is a curtal axe, this sounds like definitely a type of sword worn in a scabbard at the side. Next I came across another piece of text from the Stuart era. This is after 1600, so this is from a book called Stuart Tracts, which in other words, bits of text written down during the Stuart dynasty of 1603 to 1693, edited by Charles Harding Firth. And in this it talks about an event that happened at sea on board ship, and it says, at the first report of our piece, that means cannon, and the hurly-burly in the decks, the captain was writing in his cabin, and hearing the noise thought it some strange accident, and so came out with his curtal axe in his hand, presuming by his authority to pacify the mischief. So he thought there was some kind of affray happening on board his ship, and so he ran out holding his curtal axe. Can you see the clues coming here? But when he casted his eye upon us and saw that we were like to surprise the ship, he threw down his curtal axe and begged to save his life. So whatever this curtal axe was, a captain on board a ship was holding one. He ran out of his cabin holding it, saw that the odds were against him and threw it down and begged for his life. So what is the curtal axe? Well, yes, I'm sure you've guessed it by now. The curtal axe is apparently a late 16th century and into the 17th century English rendition of what we now know as the word cutlass. That's right. So a cutlass is a short sword, usually single-edged or predominantly single-edged, usually with some form of hand protection. So quickly, let's just divert away from the text. I will come back to text in a second. So in the 16th century, this, for example, although we might commonly refer to this as a Langmesser, this could be referred to as a cutlass or a hanger or a falchion. However, this can now also be referred to in the Shakespearean Elizabethan era as a curtal axe. This is a curtal axe, this is what it is. Later on, in the 19th century, they would evolve into things like this hanger here, usually with sidebars, or often with sidebars, sometimes with a simple knuckle bow, and sometimes with a full sheath guard. So a lot of you, when you hear the word cutlass, will think of the stereotypical pirate cutlass as you saw in pirate movies when you were a kid. And in fact, a lot of those were actually 19th century military cutlasses used by the Royal Navy and US Navy and various other people. If we go back to the golden age of piracy in the 17th and 18th centuries, so 1600s and the early 1700s, in fact a lot of cutlasses back then actually looked more like this and actually had quite simple minimalistic handguards, or indeed if we go all the way back into the Elizabethan era, they would have looked somewhat more like this. Sometimes this lug at the side was developed into a shell guard, sometimes they had a full bar at the side, and so on and so forth. But essentially, the common fact here is it's a short sword, can be straight, can be slightly curved, predominantly with one cutting edge, with usually some form of relatively developed handguard, because the people who used a curtal axe or cutlass usually weren't wearing gauntlets or any kind of hand protection, because they were sailors or gunners or these types of people who needed their manual dexterity and so didn't have separate hand protection. They needed the hand protection built into the sword. And of course, this was the era, the Elizabethan era onwards, when swords commonly did have hand protection on them. Anyway, and I found actually a version of As You Like It by William Shakespeare, which has a footnote in it entered by Horace Howard Furness, I think in the early 20th century, and he gives a footnote to the word curtal axe. Now, curtal axe can be spelt in various different ways, and it can also be spelt cuttle axe, curtal axe, and the curtel can be L-E or E-L, and it can be hyphenated into two separate words, and the axe can be A-X or A-X-E. So if you search under numerous different spellings of curtal axe, then you'll actually find different sources, because different sources spell it in different ways. But he says curtal axe, he says this is a cutlass. The termination is an instance of a frequent corruption by which a word is altered so as to correspond to a supposed etymology. Other forms of the word, due to the same tendency, are cutlace and cutlash. A curtal axe was not an axe at all, but a short sword. I completely agree, you're correct. The word is formed from a diminutive of the Latin cultulus. Florio's dictionary, which is a very useful Italian-English dictionary from the early 1600s, 1611 I think, he has coltellaccio, which is Italian version of it, and he writes a cuttle axe, a hanger. So literally in Florio's dictionary of 1611, he explains that a coltellaccio in Italian is a cuttle axe, a curtal axe, aka a hanger, which is exactly what we normally call these, a hanger. So cutlass, hanger, interchangeable terms, also with curtal axe. He goes on to say that Cotgrave gives coutelas, the French version, a cut-elas, court-elas, or short sword for a man at arms, etc. Compare with Fairfax, who says his cutlax by his thigh, short, hooked, fine. And in Henry V, in Shakespeare, scarce blood enough in all their sickly veins to give each naked curtal axe a stain. So again, although that's Henry V, the play, it's written by Shakespeare, so it's Shakespearean's era. Again, Lodge in his novel, to the gentleman readers says, here you may perhaps find some leaves of Venus myrtle, but hewn down by a soldier with his curtal axe. And it goes on with other examples. So basically, of these words, and so I found another dictionary entry which gives the origin for the word cutlass as cutelas or coutelas, a form of cutel, modern couteau, which is the French word for knife, and Latin cultulus, which is a diminutive of coulter, a ploughshare, a cutting instrument. Two variations appear in English: curtelace, which this probably comes from the French or Latin origin, and then curtal axe, which is sometimes spelt as two words, curtal axe, where the prefix curtal is confused with various English words such as curtain, curtail, or indeed a curtal, which all refer to shortened things. So in other words, in English, because of the confusion to draw things short, a short version of a sword, it could be thought that a cutlass is a curtal axe, is a curtalas or lash, which is a shortened sword because it is a short sword. So sometimes the etymology, the origin of a word can be down one line, but it can be misunderstood because of its similarity to a word in another language, and it can be assumed it has that association when it doesn't always. An example with a modern animal, for example, would be the praying mantis, which comes from the fact that it has its hands together and it looks like it's praying, but they're also predatory and they go preying on flies, when those two words are actually not related. So there we go. The sword that I had not heard of until today, but I should have done. I had never heard the word curtal axe before in my life, but if I had studied my Shakespeare, then possibly I would have done. And it is a good example of where learning more about a word, a curtal axe, teaches you more about a cutlass or a hanger, an object that you actually know very well and know lots about. And it opens up windows into history because it enables you to now research using that word, curtal axe, and other derivations and different spellings of it. It enables you to now research into new historical documents and find new sources that you might not have found previously because you didn't know the right word to plug into that search engine. So etymology and word learning, incredibly important even to the study of swords. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope this has been mildly interesting. Please give me a thumbs up if it has, and I hope I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.